It's a beautiful early November day here in College Station, Texas. And so today we're going to install the soil moisture sensors. Over here I have the sensors in water, and we need to install these wet. But let me show you what I've done here. This here is a piece of 1/2 inch Schedule 315 PVC. And the nice thing about this PVC is it fits the sensors perfectly. If you look, it slides over the top, makes a tight fit, and it's the same diameter as the sensor. So it makes it real easy. And some people like installing PVC tubes with the sensors. And we're going to do that today. And I painted them. And I'll show you why I painted them here in a few minutes. So what I did was I painted the PVC. I glued the watermark sensor. I put some glue around the base, glued it, and then let me show you how we handle the top. So we don't want to install it like this because you'll get water going down the tube, dirt, and all that good stuff. So I came in with a pair of shears, and I just cut out a slot, okay? And that way the wires can hang down. We put the cap on, and the cap will not pinch the wires, okay? And then to seal this part, I have some exterior waterproof tape. And so I just cut a piece. It's a little hard to work with, but you'll probably be better at it than me. It takes a little practice because the tape wants to stick to the scissors. So we have this, and then we just take the piece of tape and we tape over the hole. Okay? And that way that'll keep water from entering the tube. Some people like to drill a small drainage hole in here. I don't think we're going to get any water in here, so I think it'd be fine. And you see we have way too much wire. So what we're going to do is trim the wire. We're going to leave it long enough so we can hook the meter to it when we take our readings. And so I just need to pull these apart and then strip the ends. There's one, and there's the other one. Okay? And now we're good to go. So I'll put these back in the water. And then we also are going to install them without PVC under a center pivot. So what I have here is the handheld meter. Okay, so it attaches, and then when it's time to read, we just clamp the ends on our wire, And then I'll hit the read button. And we aren't going to get a reading now because the sensors are totally saturated. So anyway, that's the way that works. It's really straightforward. We'll talk more about taking readings and how to use the readings later. Okay, so that's all there is to that. I have my soil probe, my measuring tape, and now we're ready to install the first set of sensors in a small vineyard over here behind me. Okay, I'm standing here in the mini vineyard here at the Texas A&M Gardens. And the next question is, where do we want to install these sensors? First rule is someplace where you'll remember where they are and it's easy to get to. Okay? And then the other, when we start looking at which row we want to put them in, we want to avoid the edges. So we want to go over a little bit from the edges because we expect different conditions here in this open middle than we would have in the vineyard. So I'm going to come over here. And one rule of thumb is about 1/3 of the distance from the edge, but it's not real critical. So I came out here last week and I measured the soil depth, and it turns out that it's very shallow here. We have only 18 inches of soil here. That's all. And then we get into a hard pan. And that is fairly unusual because in a normal agricultural setting, we would expect to have much deeper soils. So since we have 18 inches, I decided that we'll put in 3 sensors, 6 inch, 12 inches, and 18 inches. And so what I did is I added an extra 4 inches so it would stick above the ground and we could see it. The reason I painted it brown was so it would blend in some, since this is public gardens. This is so it would be a little bit more subtle than if you just had white PVC sticking out. But if this was a real vineyard, then you wouldn't go through all this bother. Okay, so where do we put them in? We like to put them in as close to the row as the plants as we can. Okay, and you see here that we have drip irrigation. So the other consideration is we want to be sure that we install the sensors in between the emitters. Okay, we don't want to install the sensors directly under the emitter. So we have an emitter here, and we have an emitter. They put an emitter by each plant. It's not a particularly good design, but that's a subject for a separate video. But it turns out that here at the gardens, they do not use the drip irrigation. They just use sprinklers because they water the grass and the grapes at the same time. So in this case, if they were using this, then we would just come using the 1/3 rule, at least 1/3 over between the two emitters. So what we're going to do is put the sensors in the row about right here. I can't get right in the middle because we have some wires in the way, but it's not real critical. This is close enough. So what you want to do is you don't want to make a hole deeper than you need. So it's always a good idea to measure, and I just eyeball it. You can make a mark on your probe, the correct depth, but I'm going to eyeball it. And so all I do is come here, make a hole down to 6 inches, and pull out our core. Okay? So we do have good loamy clay soil here. Even though it's not very deep, I think the grapes will do fine here. And then these, we just put them in. And then what we like to do is be sure we have good soil sensor contact. So I'm going to stuff the soil around it, and when we're finished, I'm going to pour a little water in it to just help get that soil sensor sealed. So that's the first one. The second one is 12 inches. And so I'll come here and measure about where the 12-inch is. Like I said, you can mark this if that helps you. And we'll come in and just put it right next to the first one. Okay, so okay. So oop, I got a little bit too deep, so I'll just stick in a little soil. And get us to the depth. A little excess soil here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in here in a second. The third sensor is going in at 18 inches. And this probe actually has a mark at 18 inches. But you have to be real careful. You don't want to try to take out more soil than you can hold in this depth. So that means we're going to have to do this twice. So we'll go down about that deep. And the reason we do it like this, we don't want to compress the soil here or in the hole. And then the second time we should be able to go down to our 18-inch mark. Not quite deep enough. Okay, that should do it. So there's different ways to do this. One way you can do is take a cup, take the soil, make a slurry, and then pour the slurry down around the sides to be sure you get that good contact. In lots of soils, what you can do is just pour a little water. That will help get that seal. So they're in here. I'm turning the wires kind of away from the edge here where they come in with the machinery for the grass. And so if you're going to have different people coming out to read these, then you're going to have to mark which one is 1, 2, 3. The shallow, the intermediate, and the deepest. Okay? So that's all there is to it. So it'll take a few days for the sensor to come in equilibrium with the soil moisture level. And so we'll come back out and start reading these in a few days after that. And then at that point, we'll be reading these about twice a week. And we'll be using the data to help the manager irrigate the grapes much better. And as you see the grapes, they haven't done a great job of irrigation, and they let the grapes get stressed out about a month ago. So we're going to solve that problem by using soil moisture sensors. Okay, here we are at the mini pivot site here at the gardens, and we're going to put a monitoring station in this area. And if you notice that this is the high spot of this particular pivot, and it slopes downhill that way. And so the first thing we have to do before we install anything is be sure we mark the edge so we can find the sensors when the wheat is taller. So if we come down here, so I'm starting at this spot, and what's at this spot, we have our wheat planted under the span, and then here, going back this way, is a section that's planted under the overhang. So this is a spot that I can identify when the plants get tall, and so what I'm going to do is come over 1, 2 rows, and I'll install the sensors in this row. So that's one way of identifying where the sensors are. The other way you can do is maybe put a flag or a stake at the end, or you might have another landmark or something that you can use. So it's important that you do that so you'll be able to find the sensors. Okay? Okay, so I'm interested in putting it in this area, this general area, and then where under the span should you put the sensors? Well, one rule of thumb we use is about 1/3 of the way under the span, about 1/3 of the way from the wheel tracks to the pivot point. And so this is roughly about 1/3 of the distance. And then we have our row, and I'll come over 2 plant rows and put the sensors here in the line of the plants. Okay, so oh, I hit something. Okay, so it's not going in here. Let's move it over some and see what we got. Okay, so it looks like we have a rock here. So we need to move to plan B and adjust our location. Okay, I've run into a hard pan. So we have a very shallow soil here. And it feels like some sort of a hard pan or some really dense clay. So let's see how deep our topsoil is. Okay, so it's about that deep. So it looks like we have 10 inches of topsoil. Okay, just 10 inches, which is very shallow. So what we're going to do is install 2 sensors. Since it's a very shallow topsoil, we'll put one sensor about halfway down, about in the middle of the root zone, and then we'll put the other sensor down at 10 inches at the bottom of the root zone. Okay? So we have our hole, and you see the sensors are soaking in water. We want to install these wet. So I'll just pull out the sensor and then stick it in the hole, and it slid right down to the bottom of the hole. When you go into deeper soils, when you have, normally we would, you would expect plants, crops like this to have very deep root zones going down to 3 feet or deeper. In those cases, we would put a sensor at 1, 2, and 3 feet deep. And so what you do need when you get to deeper soil, you'll need a push rod to help you get the sensor down into the ground. And this is just a wooden rod. You be careful of metal rods because you don't want to damage the electrical wires. Okay, so the first sensor is in, and then the next step is we need to fill back up the hole with the soil, and my approach is to put the soil back in the same order that we brought it in. So the deeper the soil sample will go in first. So what I'm going to do is put a little of the soil back in here, not too much, just a little bit. And we also want to have good sensor soil contact. And so I find putting a little soil in and pouring a little water in the hole will help get that close contact. Some people will take the soil, mix a little water in and make a slurry and pour it in, but I found that this works just as well, and it's a little bit easier. So I pull out the rest of the soil, and then Then you can just fill in with the surrounding soil if you need some more. Okay, so I pour some water in it, and this sensor is fine. And so just so I'll know what depth, which one this is a deeper sensor, so I'm going to tie 2 knots in the wire, and this will indicate that this is the deeper sensor. Okay, so the next step is to put in the second sensor, and we're going to put it in at 5 inches. So what we do is, how deep do we need to push it down? So what I do is I just eyeball it on the probe. You can put a little mark on here. That makes it easier for you. So that means I just need to go down that deep. I'll come over and put it close to the first one. Okay. And it looks like I went a little bit too deep. See? So what I'll do is just put some soil back in order to get the right depth. A little bit more, and I believe that should do it. And that gives us 5 inches, which is our target depth. Okay, so we're going to put the second sensor in that hole. Okay, so my second sensor, drop it in the hole. So I'll get my push rod. Yep, it's at the bottom. Then I take the soil we pulled out, stick it in the hole, pour in some water, and fill in surrounding soil. And then I'm going to take this, and this is our shallower sensor, so I'm going to put 1 knot. So when I come back out here, I'll know which is which. You can also use color tape as another option to mark your depths. And then you have these wires. What farmers typically do is just leave the wires on the ground. Okay, what we're going to do is use a little stake and kind of just wrap the wires around this stake. You know, it's not real critical what you do, as long as you can find the sensors when it's time to read them. And other options is to put a longer pole and maybe just clamp these onto the pole is another option. Okay, so it's complete. The installation is complete. And then we'll come back in a few days We need to give it 2-3 days to come in equilibrium with the moisture content of the soil, and then we can start taking readings.